John, you're okay with your Lightning?
I don't know. I've used this yesterday. I don't know. It does not like your Zoom. I don't
Doesn't
know
like my
why.
Zoom.
I used it on a Teams call yesterday and it was fine. So we'll see. I'll turn it off. It's too embarrassing, but
Is it the light? Is it a light that's giving the issues, or?
no, it's because I don't really like this webcam, but I'll turn it off if needed. Sorry.
Did you want to go back out and come back in, or
Um,
would that help? Or?
We'll see if I maybe turn it on and off again. That seemed to have done it for a little bit, but I'm gonna be sharing my screen anyways here. So let me do that.
Okay. Well, if you're doing that, I'll just introduce you. So John is a freelance scientific software developer for life sciences industry. In particular, we're going to be talking about Workflowr, which I'm very excited about, to help organize computational research in a way that promotes effective project management. So thank you very much, John, for agreeing to talk.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Rohan. And I'm very glad to follow Florencia. The ReproHack is a great project, and it introduces a lot of the concepts that Workflowr tries to help with. Let's make sure I can advance my slides. All right, so before I forget, so thank you to Rohan and the other organizers and the sponsors. If you're interested in my talk, there were some earlier ones that are really relevant you'll want to check out. So Data Kit by Megan Hoyer and Larry Fenn yesterday, that link there. And I'll share the link to my slides. I was going to do that right beforehand, but I was dealing with my video issues. I'll take you right there. And then this morning, Julia did a nice R Markdown intro. She didn't want it recorded, so I didn't link to that, but you check out her repository there, Reproducr, that she's developing. Okay, and then also we've done, I'm not going to talk much about reproducibility since it's been very well introduced at this point. Just want to talk about what I'm trying to tackle with Workflowr. So it's this computational reproducibility. If you were at Radu's talk yesterday morning, it's being able to run the same code, the same data, get the same result. And really, this is not this, it's always sort of framed as this altruistic thing, like you're helping other people in humanity, but the person who's going to be affected most is you, because you are the person who's most invested in your code and having to rerun it when you get the reviews back in 6 months. And it's important to remember, so this other side of the coin that Radu was talking about, this other scientific reproducibility is, I don't want to overpromise, Workflowr will help you run your code again, but that has nothing to do with whether or not what you're doing is principled. It can't help, no software can save you from that. Okay, so a little bit about my motivation here. So in grad school, I did various collaborations. So one big one I was working with, so I'm more of like a bioinformatician. So I was collaborating with Po-Yan, who's a stem cell biologist, and Joyce, who's a biostatistician. We had all these, we were doing single cell RNA sequencing. So we had all these data files, we were doing all these different analyses, all looking at different things. And so we decided, okay, we're going to put all our data analysis code on GitHub. But even then, like, it's one thing to source code, version the source code, but what about the results? Am I looking at the latest results? If you show me some figure in a PowerPoint slide, where did that come from, right? And also, so we'd have our weekly meetings with our boss, my PI Yoav. And so I would have involved in emailing a report, which I have a visceral negative reaction to emailing reports. It hurts because they're immediately outdated. Because of course we're trying to get ready, prepare analyses for the meeting. So we're always setting last minute updates. And so the emails, literally the report is outdated the second you send it. So it's this sort of context and these sort of collaborative research environments that maybe want to look at more tools. And so I love this review by Julia Stewart-Lowndes, because she was discovering in her group a lot of the same tools that I'm using, like Git and GitHub and R and R Markdown, things we've already talked about over the last 2 days. And I really like how she kind of lays it out here in this nice graphical format. So on the x-axis is ease of collaboration, and on the y-axis is ease of reproducibility. Because reproducibility is often framed as this, oh, I have to spend all this time learning these tough tools, and so I could be doing other research, right? It's taken away from my research. But that's not the right way to frame it. Once you start doing these tools, you're going to be going faster because you don't have to try and reinstall everything. If you use something like Nix, like Simeon showed this morning, you can just get your environment up and running. You don't have to waste all that time when you come back to it in 6 months. So you really, in the long term, will save a lot more time. You'll get more research done. It'll be easier to collaborate with others. So with that, with all these great open source tools, what Workflowr tries to do is tries to combine them so you don't have to spend 6 months to a year learning them. You can get started with working on them right away and then learn as you go, get the benefits immediately. And so the end product of Workflowr, before I go into the details, is going to be a website with your results that are going to be as good as what you put in. So as Florencia mentioned, if you have an R Markdown file but have no text in it explaining what's going on, that's only going to be so useful, right? It'll be as useful as you put in, but what Workflowr helps you do is keep it organized, reproducible, versioned, and shareable. And we'll go through those in turn. So first, organization. So this was covered as what I talked about the data kit earlier. That's a big thing, is that when you first start a project, you're not really sure where it's going. So you maybe just put a couple files in a directory, right? But that quickly gets unsustainable because you're going to keep working on this project. You're going to keep having files. So like this XKCD comic, you don't want to end up like this person where the documents directory is just tons of untitled files that you have no idea what they do. And what you want to do is have something more described in Noble 2009. We have a nice hierarchical directory structure where the source data, the clean data, the source code are all in different places, and also the results are organized. But again, this is a lot of effort to keep disciplined and to start this off right at the beginning. So how does Workflowr help here? So it has a function called Workflow Start. You give it the name of your project. That's going to end up being the name of your directory. Then within that, it has a whole bunch of subdirectories. So your analysis is where you can put your R Markdown files. Code is stuff you're going to run non-interactively, like submit to an HPC cluster. Your data, your docs is where the website's going to live, and various other files. And this is just a suggestion. You can change the names of these. You can delete most of them. Really, the only required one is the analysis directory, and you can call it whatever you want. But the idea is, with one go, get started to working. You don't have to think a lot about, well, where am I going to put everything? Okay, reproducible. Check the time here. Okay. Okay, so we've already had various people talk about Literate Program with R Markdown, and it's because it's such an awesome tool. So I won't belabor too much, but just a quick overview is that it's a way to mix your text, your code, and your results. So when you're looking at a figure, you can look above and see the interpretation and the exact code that created it. You're not going to wonder, well, was there a copy paste error? Is this the result from 3 months ago? If you're looking at a PowerPoint slide, if you have an R Markdown document, you can know the exact code. You can see the parameters that user to create it. And of course, this is supported by the amazing knitr and R Markdown packages. And so Workflowr is built on top of R Markdown. And so what it's doing is just sort of automating that process. So you can, R Markdown has support for building what are called R Markdown websites. And at the end of the day, that's what Workflowr is building for you. So it has a command called workflow build. It goes through, looks at all your R Markdown files, and creates the HTML and stores that in docs. And a nice convenience is that it checks, sort of like a makefile, if you're familiar with GNU Make, it checks the timestamps of the R Markdown versus the HTML. So that if you've only been editing one of your R Markdowns and you run workflow build, it'll just build that one again. It won't rebuild your entire website because you might have long running code in another file that you don't want run every time. Okay, and so as the base, it's using that R Markdown website infrastructure, but then it adds all this extra reproducibility to try and automate this. Because a lot of times, if you read any articles on reproducibility or go to a workshop, sort of this laundry list of, well, you should do X, you should do Y, you should do Z, and it's going to be very overwhelming for someone who just wants to analyze some data. And it's also really easy to forget. I forget all the time, especially if you're on a deadline. Maybe you're trying to get something ready to submit to a conference. You're not going to remember, oh, did I set the seed? Did I clear my cache? Did I do this, that, and the other thing? The idea of this reproducibility report is what can be automated, should be automated, so that you can focus on the interesting parts of your results. And we'll go through some of these checks, but the basic idea is if you see a green check mark, that means it passed. If you see a red mark, you can do the drop down, it'll sort of tell you what the issue is and how to fix it. And then if someone else is seeing your results, say you push it online and there was a one of them failed, they'll know what exactly failed and they can take that into account. So for one thing, I've been stressing this on the conference Slack here, but a big, I think, impediment to reproducibility and people finding out the repro hacks is just how we want people to be able to reproduce, but also extend this work. And so you want to lower the barriers for someone else to extend your work, make it as easy as possible. And one thing that really makes it very tedious is absolute paths. So if you put things like, I've got this absolute path here to my desktop on my Windows machine, that is only going to run there. If I try and run this code on my HPC cluster, it's going to fail. If you clone it to your computer, it's going to fail. So you have to start by going through and finding all these and cleaning them up and figuring out what they should be. And absolute and relative paths are one of those things that you can be using computing for a long time and just never get taught. Unfortunately, a lot of researchers are just sort of self-taught. It's just how it goes. So what it does is it tells you what the relative path would be to help you resolve it very quickly. Another thing is setting the seed. So this is something I had been using R for years before I even heard of this. If you're doing a sort of random procedure, so like say you're doing a permutation p-value or a bootstrap or anything like that, I mean, obviously you want to run it a couple of times to make sure it's robust. You don't want your result to rely on a seed, but at the same time, once you establish that it's robust and you want to put like a p-value, permutation p-value in your paper or whatever, you don't want to 6 months ago when you're doing the reviews have to like change the third decimal place, right? You just want that number to always be the same and just know, okay, nothing has changed. And so what that does is automatically sets the seed for you, and it does that across all the documents. So you never have to worry about remembering to set the seed. Time here, okay. So it also records a session information at the end. So this is often an advice to give if you're submitting a bug report or anything like that. But it's easy to forget. And so what this does is it automatically does it every single time. And then it's also in this nice drop-down box, so it doesn't obscure your analysis if you don't, if you are doing something where you want to sort of focus on the results and not so much the code, maybe you hit all the code chunks or something like that. It's in this nice drop-down box. So someone only has to look at, if they're really interested in what version of R you used, maybe they're trying to reproduce it and they're using R4, they're getting errors. They look and say, oh, you used R3. Maybe I'll try to do it with R3. Another big issue, which is a problem with the defaults on both the R GUI and the R Studio, is that it saves your environment and reloads it every time. So I always tell people to please turn that off if I'm helping them, because you restart your R session, you think you're starting from fresh, but you're not. It reloads everything. So you'll see people who have like a year's worth of their R objects in their R session, which it makes it really easy to make a mistake, because if you change the name of a variable and you change it in 2 out of the 3 places in your script, and that old one's still living there, that code's still going to run until someone tries to run it on their computer or you get a new machine. So to prevent about this, what Workflowr build does is it's rendering each one of those R Markdown files. So think about the R Markdown render, but it's doing its own R process. So if you've got variables or packages or mixing that sort of thing, let's say you load a package to let's say you load ggplot2 in the first R Markdown, but you forget to do it in the second, that second one's going to fail because it won't have that loaded. It's going to say you need these, each one of these need to be self-contained and rerunnable. So it saves you from pernicious errors that are hard to debug by always running in its own separate session. So you find that, but if you didn't load a library, if you forgot a variable name or something like that, forgot to define a variable, you find it instantly, and not 6 months later when the analysis is no longer fresh in your mind. Okay, and then versioned. So I really love version control. I spent a lot of time trying to teach people version control, but the problem is that it's inherently difficult when you first get started. It is just not easy to start adopting. A lot of times you need to use the command line, but even if you use a GUI interface, it's just a lot to take in, and it's hard to ask someone just getting started or even someone who's established. It doesn't matter where they are in their journey. If they haven't used it before, they know they're going to take a productivity hit short term to adopt it. But what Florencio was saying in the repro hack, talking about how it's really useful to have a sort of track your development, your history of your project, right? And one of the best ways to do that is with version control. You'll always have your latest copy ready for you to use, but you have that development history for you to go back and look at and say, well, why did I decide to change this parameter in the model? You can go back and look at your commit history, look at the message and say, oh, I changed it because of this evidence. Okay, and so what Workflowr tries to do, what it does is it's built on top. So it does all the Git in the back end. So you don't have to be a Git expert to be able to use it. So Workflow build, which I introduced earlier, that's for building it locally when you're actively developing it. But once you're ready to share it with other people, you want to put it on your website, then you're going to run Workflow publish. And that's where the Git comes in. So what it's going to do is it's going to git commit your source R markdown file. So you have that exact version of the source code committed to your version control repository. Then it's going to build the HTML from that committed R markdown file and insert the version of the repository directly into the HTML. So if you're looking at that HTML, you know the state of the repository when it was created. And then it commit changes to the HTML file. A lot of people always talk about committing the source code, but as applied researchers, I really think it makes sense to also commit the HTML because that's really what you care about, right? Is the results. And so by doing it this way, if you do it always in these 3 steps, you don't have to use Workflow publish. The Workflowr checks pass if you do these 3 steps manually. But let's say you commit the R markdown and the HTML at the same time, then the check is going to fail. And that's because you may tell yourself, yes, I definitely rebuilt it before I committed both of them, but there's no guarantee at 3 a.m. when you're struggling to try and finish something that you remember to do that. If you didn't remember to rebuild the HTML and you made an edit to the R markdown, you commit them together, you're never gonna be able to get back to the state that actually committed that HTML because you forgot to commit it first. Okay, I don't want to belabor this point, but the idea is that because it's built on top of Git, you can run workflow status, and that will tell you what Workflowr considers the status of each R markdown. It's sort of a mix of, it's the Git status of the R markdown and the HTML. So if you're just committing the R markdown, we consider that unpublished because it's not going to show up on your website online. Only once you start committing the HTML as well is it a published thing that's going to show up online. So it can still be, you can still create the HTML locally with the Workflow build, but it's not published as in someone's going to see it if they're going online until you run Workflow publish. Okay, and lastly, so we want to make it easy to share. Like I said, I really do not like emailing reports. So if you're already using something like GitHub or GitLab for your source code, they both have these nice services. So for example, GitHub calls theirs GitHub pages and GitLab calls theirs GitLab pages. But what they'll do is host a website for you for free. So if you're already using one of these services to host your code, you can take advantage of this free service and also host the results website. So your initial setup, depending on whether you're using GitHub or GitLab, you put that in and put your username. And so like, let's say you're using Workflow use GitHub, you put in your username. It will create the GitHub repository for you. So if you've never done that before, it'll just do it for you. You have to log in, but after that, it'll just do it for you. And it'll set up everything for those who know Git. I know a lot of people on this call are very knowledgeable. So it does things like set up the remote repository and all that sort of stuff for them. So again, this is one of the things where you're saying, instead of saying, oh, do this Git tutorial and try and use the command line and all that sort of thing, they can be in an unfamiliar R environment, run one command, and it gets everything set up for them. And then as you are publishing and making commits and updates, then you can run Workflow git push from R to push it to GitHub or GitLab or wherever you have it stored. And there's nothing special about that command other than it runs in R. You can run git push in the terminal or in the RStudio GUI, git pane, or whatever GUI you prefer. Okay, so one of my favorite features, so once you have that on, say GitHub or GitLab, so next to the checks is this table of past versions. So if you click on that, it'll take you and show you the website as it was at that date. And if you click on an R markdown link, it'll take you that exact version of the R markdown that created it. So what I really like about this is, like, let's say you send this to your collaborator and they want to find the version of the figure that you used in a poster for a conference 6 months ago. Well, you don't have to like go into the Git in the terminal and try and find it for them. Just with using their web browser and clicking around, they can go to the past versions, they can go to the date, they can click on it, see the website as it was, and download the image. Without you needing to teach them Git first or you having to figure it out. They can navigate just on a website and find the old version. Okay, let me just check time here. Okay, we're doing all right. So, so that's how Workflowr helps you be more organized, reproducible, versioned, and shareable. You can try it out. It's on CRAN, so go ahead and just run your typical install.packages. You do need an account on GitHub or GitLab if you want to use the online features. I mean, it's still good to use locally if you don't want to put it up there. And if you just want to get a sense for if you like the workflow and the strategy, you can run through the getting starting vignette. We'll take you from zero to having a little play website that you can see if you like it or not. Okay, so I've told you about all these cool things that Workflowr does, but there are limitations. It doesn't do everything for you. We were talking about this earlier, like why hasn't someone just solved reproducibility? It's because it's a hard problem, and every field and every researcher has different needs and what they're going to prioritize. So it records your software dependency, but it doesn't manage them for you because there's so many different options, and I didn't really want to reinvent this or prescribe people having to use one of them. Like I could make people use REnv and really tie that into Workflowr, but then they couldn't use other things like Conda or Nix like Simeon introduced, or they could go full and just use a Docker Singularity container. Workflowr is agnostic to that. It'll record it with that session info. So if you know that in your Docker container, you were using R3 and you look at the session info was R4, you can go, oh, I ran that on my machine. I didn't run it in my Docker container, and go fix that. And also complex pipelines. So Workflowr is really this, it's based on R Markdown. So it's for this really iterative exploratory data analysis step that I feel like can really, really be hard to capture, right? We all do it. When you're doing that data analysis step, you're trying different models, you're trying different plots, and it can be really hard to keep track of that development, right? So that's where Workflowr really tries to combine Git for version control with the R Markdown, that iterative process. But if you have a more complex pipeline with lots of steps or lots of files, you can use a tool like Targets or one of your other favorite pipeline tools and help integrate that and combine them with Workflowr. In a recent issue, Workflowr users are discussing how they're trying to integrate Targets with Workflowr. Okay, so a new project. So Workflowr has been around for years now. And it helps people, keep their research organized. But one part that I've been frustrated by is it's hard to discover these, right? So unless someone's going to your GitHub page or they're reading your paper and they see in the methods sections you linked to your Workflowr project, or you email them because they're your collaborator, it can be hard for anyone to find any of this stuff, right? So I really want to promote open science, reproducible science, or research. It doesn't have to be the hard sciences, it can be any sciences or research. So I created this Workflowr Io. It was a way for people who have Workflowr projects to register them to make them more discoverable. And so the idea is when you register your projects, so you'll be in this list of projects that has a little screenshot of your landing page. It'll have any tags you add. And you can also add publications. So if you happen to support a publication and you have reproducible research supported by a Workflowr project, I want to promote that. I want people to be able to find that and say, hey, here's a list of publications that have an entire website that describes what they did in a reproducible way. Here's just an example from my former colleague, Brianna Middleman. So during her PhD work, she had this repository. So Workflowr project. So when she published her paper, she put that in the methods section. And now if you go here, you can see the link to her paper, and then you can get to the repository as well. And if you have a Workflowr project or you're considering creating a Workflowr project, you can register it to be more discoverable in just a few clicks. The way it works is with a GitHub app. So you install the GitHub app, Workflowr Io GitHub app on whatever repositories you want to share. So if you only want to share one of them, you just install it on that, and it'll be added to the website. And so those tags that you saw people have, those are just GitHub topics. So if you have a GitHub repository, you can add little topics at the top. So it's good to add on GitHub, and you'll get it for free on Workflowr Io. It uses the same ones. And then if you have a publication, you just open an issue on Workflowr Io, give me the DOI of that paper, and it can be a preprint or whatever it is. As long as it has a DOI, I can use it. And then it'll add your publication and then link it to however many, either one or more Workflowr projects that are associated with that publication. Okay, so acknowledge, so my PI while I was developing this was Matthew Stevens at the University of Chicago, and then my close collaborator was Peter Carbonetto. And this work was supported by a grant to Matthew Stevens by the Moore Foundation to support data science and reproducible data science. Had a lot of Workflowr users, contributors, file bug reports, feature requests, and contribute their own patches, which is really great. Like I said, this is combining lots of great tools just to make it more convenient to use, right? So things like Git, R Markdown, call R, all these sorts of things, building on the shoulders of giants. So I really appreciate all their work. And again, the conference organizers has been a really great to be able to focus so much on reproducibility for entire 2 days. So thanks for listening. Here's a link. Like I said, I'll post it in the Slack in the Zoom as well. And we want to shout out, there's lots of workflow software for R and other things. So I have 2 different resources. So one's, I have this repository called R Project Workflows. That's really a hodgepodge of anything that's related to R and workflows I put in there. And then I'm a co-maintainer of the task view for reproducible research. That's we tend to just use CRAN packages, but those are also great resources. Okay, and so with that, I'll take questions. I'll stop sharing my screen here.
Thanks, John. That was great. Yulia, did you want to just, you could just unmute yourself if you wanted to ask your question. Otherwise, I can do it if you want to. Our earlier speaker.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I'm not on the laptop anymore. I'm actually on the bicycle, so it took a while to unmute myself from the phone. So I was just interested. I mean, that's a great project. Thanks a lot for this great presentation. Do you have any impression on or idea even on which users, like which fields your users mostly come from the Workflowr Io package, like either from academia or so from industry, or do you have any idea about this?
Well, so I can only track public things, so they have to put it in the public. So I mean, I definitely think it's more academics, just because they're more likely to share. It tends to be the natural sciences, especially biology, just because that's where I'm from. So people find it from me. But there's nothing specific to the natural sciences about it.
Yes.
So.
Okay.
And you can see the list of projects there. It is mostly, I think, natural sciences. There's an anthropology, but that's it's physical anthropology, but epidemiology, that sort of thing. But yeah, it's for anything.
Yeah, great, interesting, very, very interesting. Great, thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you for the question.
Are there any other questions? How do you ease people into this? When they bring you in, how do you sort of ease them into it?
Well, I guess to me, this is the ease into that, because before, so what I had developed during my PhD was this hodgepodge of make files, and you had to run the Git commands yourself, and it was really complicated, and there was Git branches involved, and it was quite complex. And was my motivation for this package, is people wanted to use the template. So basically I've created a template. People tried to use the template and it was really hard, and they got frustrated, and then they stopped using it. So I try to think of how can I make it so that people can adopt all these best practices, but make it possible. So install.packages Workflowr, that really lowered the barrier for a lot. You don't have to have a bunch of stuff installed. You don't even have to have, technically you don't have to even have Git installed, because it uses the Git2R package, which bundles a Git client in there. So you don't even have to install Git. So yeah, that's the way it tries to use it. Is that it's built for someone who knows, is comfortable with R. They don't really have to know much about Git or any of this other stuff if they're comfortable with R.
Sylvia, did you want to expand on what you added into the chat?
Oh, nothing. I don't know a whole lot about it. I just know someone who used Workflowr to create an R for data science solutions guide. So I just provided a link in the chat box as an example.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, we just added, that's for Bosch's, and we just added that to Workflowr Io, I think yesterday. So I had her get that on there because it's a really nice resource. She went all the way through. I have a Workflowr site that did that, but I went to like chapter 10 and it's not nearly as nice as hers. So I recognized how useful that was. So I wanted to share
it. Any final questions? Otherwise, I might just say thank you once again to John for a very interesting presentation. There's so many things that we need to start using all of a sudden. Really appreciate you sharing it. That was great.
All right. Thanks, everybody.